All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Montclair Planning Board. Notice of this meeting is posted in the lobby of this building and also published in the local papers. We are being broadcast live on Channel 34 and also streamed live and available on demand on YouTube. This meeting is a quasi-judicial proceeding, meaning that we have powers and procedures resembling a court of law, and we are obligated to objectively determine facts and draw conclusions from them in order to provide a basis for official action. Any questions or comments during tonight's proceeding should be limited to the issues of what the board may legally consider in reaching a decision, and decorum appropriate for a courtroom must be maintained at all times. First thing on our agenda this evening is our roll call.
Chair Nguyen?
Here.
Vice Chair Brodock?
Here.
Mr. Schwartz is excused. I think he's on his way. Mr. Cook?
Here.
Councilor Schlager?
Here.
Miss Willis? Here. Mr. Rooney?
Here.
Mr. Ian Wally? Miss Lockman? Here. Mr. Barr?
Here.
Mr. Gilmer's excused. Okay.
Okay. We have minutes from January 27th.
I received corrections to the minutes from Miss Lockman and Mr. Ian Wally that were distributed to everybody. Are there any other changes to the minutes?
No
Okay.
changes. I move that they be approved as edited by the
Okay.
members.
A second? Okay, Ms. Lockman, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? And
Abstain.
Ms. Willis and Mr. Vice Chair Brodock will abstain. Okay.
Okay, I'll just make mention that we did have the application of Jonathan and Melissa Goidel for 264 Upper Mountain Avenue listed and for tonight, but that at the applicant's request is being carried to a future meeting. Do we have a
Yeah, I
specific date?
received notice today that that application will be carried to the April 20th meeting.
Okay. And that brings us to the continuing hearing on 37 Orange Road.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Tom Troutner. I'm an attorney from the law firm of Chiesa, Shahanian, and Giatomasi here on the continuation of the application for preliminary and final major site plan approval in conjunction with the HB 37 Orange Road Montclair LLC application. When we were last here, we had commenced providing some testimony regarding the subject of parking at the site, and we're here this evening to continue that testimony. We've had a few changes in direction based on some comments at that meeting, so in order to provide an overview, I'm going to invite Mr. Stolar from the applicant to speak a little bit to that, and then our witnesses this evening include Carl Pankey from Langen Engineering, Kristen Sokich from ProPark America, as well as Kevin Webb from Langen Engineering. And with that, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd ask Mr. Stolar to come forward.
For the record, I'd like to mark in we've pre-marked the exhibits for tonight's hearing. So if I could just read that into the record. A63 are the engineering plans submitted by Langen, revised January 31st, 2020. A64 is the letter from Langen Engineering dated January 31st, 2020. A65 is the MC Residences parking plan by ProPark Mobility dated January 31st, 2020. A66 is the new proof of notice and affidavit of service submitted by the applicant. A67 is an email from John Thomas, the fire official, dated January 16th, 2020. A68 is the planning report on this application dated February 4th, 2020. A69 is the level G report dated February 4th, 2020. And A70 is the report from Suburban Consulting Engineers dated February 5th, 2020. That brings us up to date.
And I believe Mr. Stolar was previously sworn in, but if we can redo that if you prefer.
Sure. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
And can you state your name and spell your last name, please?
Brian Stolar, S-T-O-L-A-R.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. Just a quick introduction and overview to where we've gone and how we've tried to address some of the angst and the concerns that we've heard, put in perspective. So, we've been before the board quite a lot, and we really think that this project and this location where the auto body shop and the gas station currently are located, we think is very appropriate for the neighborhood. We understand the concerns that there were in place about the garage, so we have completely eliminated any reliance or use on the Orange Road deck. We do think there's a lot of available parking, but we understand the concerns about how it's to be used both for the first phase, Valley and Bloom, and for the hotel. And we don't want to give this board any more angst or difficulty to go through a lot of machinations about numbers and process over that. So we're proposing what for us is a much more expensive solution, but one that we think works well and will actually enhance the overall project the way it fits into the neighborhood. We think the project is good for the neighbors in the town. The original plan of Gateway was to create a vibrant and mixed-use development to replace what was there. And I don't know if everybody can remember, but I do, as we started here about 18 years ago in 2002. So there were 2 car dealerships that were shut down. For the record, if some people don't know, Volvo and Jaguar, that Ford was shutting down at the time before they sold them. There was a used car lot. It was for the car dealerships. And there was a car storage garage where they would just literally pack cars into that garage before they would sell them and use them for inventory because they didn't have a big parking lot. And there was the auto body shop and the gas station. And together with this board, I think we've been successful in replacing those uses that really weren't a very attractive gateway. That's why it was called, I think, Gateway when the redevelopment committee was first set up in 2010. And those uses have now all been replaced by office, residential-based retail project with a boutique hotel, not just the first one since 1938 in Montclair, but also really putting Montclair on the map in a lot of ways that people from out of town can now come here. They can stay in the hotel. People from the area can use it as sort of their home, outside their home, and we're really seeing that a lot in the lobby and all the amenities in the hotel. It's dog-friendly. We're starting to see people use that. It's really become a place for Montclair as a second home for a lot of folks. But the auto body and the gas station remain. So we're trying to figure out how to address this in a way that the board can feel comfortable. It's not this board's purview, but we also note that the taxes there are $40,000+, and under the pilot they'd be about $320, about 8 times, which is what we experienced in the other projects. All of them that we've been involved with together are about $6 million in pilots and tax payments, which has helped Montclair help contribute to your AAA status. I think there's only 3 or 4 towns in the whole state. Obviously a benefit to everyone in town. The key point, we think, is that a small residential building with a neighborhood-type retail food use is really what we're focusing towards. It's pedestrian-friendly, it's welcoming. It's welcoming to the residents, the parents for the pre-K and the elementary school, compared to the current use of an auto body shop, gas station, obviously gasoline, solvents, paints, really sort of an industrial-type use on a street with residents and schools. We think it's far safer and appropriate. And we do agree with this board's decision and the council's decision to reduce the scale of this building so that on Orange Road, which is smaller than Valley, it would be a 4-story building rather than 6. We think it's still a good way to finish off the redevelopment design for this whole block that was intended from the original redevelopment plan. And it's a lower profile, obviously, than the 6 stories, but we'll show you this very quickly here, just 2 slides. It's still will shield the rear of Valley and Bloom. And I just want to point out that in this development, and a number of others as well, the goal was to make the fronts of the buildings really, and the sides, to have the presentation. And when they were back to back, the rear of one to the rear of the other, it really wouldn't be something that the neighborhood would experience. Unfortunately, the second building never got built. So what we have here up on this slide.
Brian, if I could just stop you for a moment. So these.
Oh, let me. Yeah, exactly. I thought they were handed out.
These are
those were handed out.
these are two slides that we'll testify about when we come back with our architect. But for now, just showing them.
Just gave myself a paper cut. All right, so we'll have to mark this as,
A71.
yeah, A71.
So is there enough for everyone, I hope? Yeah. So it's really just pretty simple. A picture of the way it is today and a picture of the latest elevation, we believe with all or most of the architectural types of changes and the comments you'd given us. Obviously, we'll come back for the detailed architectural testimony. But the existing building that's here today, the auto body and gas station is shown on the first page. And again, not only is it what it is, it's sort of a real, we think, inappropriate for the neighborhood, especially with the residents across the street and the schools, the pre-K and the elementary, but it does nothing to block the rear of the Valley and Bloom building. So the new building, and this is the traditional design, more traditional design. You can't tell exactly from this picture, but if you look at the far right, you see the rear white block that's there. That's the same as the right side of the Valley and Bloom building, and then obviously the hotel to the left. So in fact, from the pedestrian view of across the street, you wouldn't see any of Valley and Bloom. I mean, obviously, if you went a couple of blocks to the west and look, you'd still see a little bit of the top of it over this building, but for the general neighborhood, it wouldn't be seen. And in addition, there's the public plaza, and I think it was pointed out by our experts, but I want to reiterate it because I don't think it comes across in these pictures. That plaza where the drop-off is, where the two cars are for the drop-off in the front, is 18 feet deep. And then where the drop-off ends on the both sides, it's 30 feet deep. So there's been reference to the sidewalk, and it's really much more of an actual plaza, a public plaza. I think it's around 3,000 square feet. So it's really a respite in the middle of the neighborhood for everybody, and it's not private. It can be used by anybody. So that's really what we wanted to show you, and then our approach on the parking will be to include all the parking inside this building. But really just wanted to make sure that our main point was brought across about how we think this fits in, and we're not looking to do anything that the redevelopment plan didn't envision, and we do welcome the idea of a smaller building than the original larger one. And that's the only point. So, thank you.
Can I ask a question? How many square feet is the building? How many square feet is it altogether?
I'm sorry?
How many square feet is the whole building?
How many square feet?
Yeah.
Obviously, I need the architect to give me exactly, but 46 units, I would estimate probably the total residential square footage is probably around 50,000 square feet.
Okay.
Maybe 55,000 or a little more with the hallways. And then the retail is 2,335 square feet, I believe. So obviously the 6-story building would have been considerably larger. Was that?
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, with that, I'd ask Mr. Pipe to come back up. Previously sworn in and previously qualified as an expert in traffic engineering. So, oh, sorry.
Yes, for the record, I recognize that I am still under oath.
All right, so Mr. Pecky, last time we were here, you were providing some testimony explaining the proposed use of the Orange Road deck to satisfy the project's intended parking requirements, and since then, obviously, the application has been amended to propose that all the parking from the project be provided on-site. So in furtherance of that, did you prepare and submit, along with Mr. Webb, a letter memorandum explaining that current proposal to the board?
I did. It's dated January 31st, 2020, which forwarded the resubmitted plans as part of the amended application.
And with respect to that proposal, if you had any conversations with Mr. Giosa, the board's expert, regarding parking in conjunction with your the amended proposal?
Yes, we did have the opportunity. We received a reviewing comment letter last week. We had the opportunity to review and digest that letter and have a conversation with regard to some of the information that Giosa had in that letter, so we did have that opportunity.
And can you give the board the benefit of what's been proposed by the most recent submission, as well as that's informed by your conversations with Mr. Giosa?
Certainly. So as Mr. Stoller testified to earlier this evening, we have amended the application. The current proposal is to provide for the required parking for the development of the 46 residential units and the roughly 2,300 square foot of commercial retail space within the building on the first floor of the building. That it really entails no significant changes in the access layout and operation of the building. What it does entail is that we are requesting from this board 2 deviations, we believe, from the redevelopment plan. One has to do with the layout of parking. The parking is proposed to be a fully valet operated 24/7 facility utilizing both mechanical stacker devices, 30 of the spaces, valet operations within the deck, as well as self-park ADA parking spaces. The second deviation we are requesting is a deviation from the parking standards in the current redevelopment plan for the residential portion of the project. Today, the redevelopment plan is calling for the parking to be provided in accordance with the residential site improvement standards, and we are proposing an alternative standard to that, consistent with the township's position on parking for residential over the last several years. So in sum, the project is proposing 73 total parking spaces. That consists of 64 spaces that are in a valet operation, a car share space that counts as 6 parking spaces, and 3 self-park ADA spaces. The plan to my right is from the resubmitted set, and basically shows the configuration and layout of the lower level parking floor of the facility, which is consistent with and similar to what you've seen on the prior submissions on this application. With regard,
Excuse me, could you just say that one more time? 73 spots?
73 total spaces.
64 valet?
Yeah, so that's made up of specifically, as discussed in the report, 64 valet spaces, which is basically 30 spaces that have double stackers in it, 4 spaces that are stored in aisles,
Okay.
a car share space, and 3 ADA spaces.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Can you just clarify the car share space again?
Sure, so for your redevelopment ordinance, one car sharing vehicle is equivalent to 6 parking spaces. And there'll be 1 car sharing vehicle maintained on site by the applicant. So with regard to the parking standards, as discussed, the redevelopment plan for this area currently calls for parking for residential to be parked for residential site improvement standards. The residential site improvement standards, as you are aware, are a statewide standard for residential units, regardless of whether you're in Salem County or Huntington County or in the middle of Jersey City or Hoboken. With regard to Montclair, your master plan has recognized, and most of, if not all of your current redevelopment plans, including the Haynes redevelopment plan, which was readopted as recently as last year, all recognize that a more appropriate parking standard for residential units in Montclair is 4.1 to 1.1 spaces per unit. We agree with that standard. We think it is appropriate, and it is actually the original design standard for this redevelopment plan before it was changed to residential site improvement standards. So based on 1.1 spaces per unit, we would require 51 parking spaces at night to accommodate the demands of the residential, or provide a parking supply for the residential. And then your redevelopment plan requires for commercial uses, retail, restaurant, food uses, office, a requirement of 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet, which for the approximate 2,300 square foot of retail space results in 9 additional spaces. So our parking requirement, based upon 1.1 space per residential unit, consistent with other redevelopment plans, and the original redevelopment plan for this site, plus the 9, results in a need for 60 parking spaces, while we're providing 73 parking spaces. So we actually are providing a comfortable cushion of parking spaces for variations in parking demand.
Can I ask you a question about that? So you're saying you have a valet 24/7, 365. Are you allocating a space to that valet person?
The valet would be an employee of the site. How he arrives at the site, whether he parks on the site or comes at a different, or comes by some other means is up to him, but we have more than enough spaces.
Yeah, in your view, you do, but you don't account for a space, a specific space for the valet.
Not specifically for that valet, and if required that he, if it implied plenty required that he find another means to arrive, we would have to do that.
Do you, oh, good, sorry. Do you foresee 1 or 2 valet?
So Mr. Sokic is here this evening, can talk to it, but
Okay.
I've had extensive conversations with him, and he views this as a very small deck. He sees a one-person operation is more than ample to accommodate the needs and turnover aspects of the site. It is a very, very small operation, very low volume, low intensity, so we don't expect really the need to staff any more than one valet at a time on the site. So with regard to the site then, as I've indicated, our total requirement, we see it at 60 spaces with 73 required. Now, I will note if you had an opportunity to...
It's not 73 required. Just clarify,
73
provided.
legally
Just clarify,
correct.
Mr. Pankey, how many
Correct.
are required so that the board,
Correct, so
so that we know what the variance is for?
per the straight calculation by the redevelopment plan, you would require 87 spaces for the residential per RSIS. If you'd like the breakdown of how that works, it's 1.8 spaces per a one-bedroom unit, 2.0 spaces for the two-bedroom unit, and 2.1 spaces for a three-bedroom unit. That's the straight RSIS spaces.
And
So
studio?
But you have to add the
A
commercial.
studio?
Studio
Is the same, is that
the
1 or
same as a
1.8?
one-bedroom.
Oh, okay.
That's
So
the way to
it's,
consider it.
so it's 87 for their RSIS plus the commercial. So I'm
Plus
s-
the 9 for the commercial,
So-
resulting in a total of 96 spaces.
That's what, I just want to make sure that that's what.
Correct. So we are asking for a deviation specifically from 96 spaces to 73 spaces provided. And the major deviation is in the residential parking standard. With regard, if you've had an opportunity to review Level G Associates' review of the proposed parking plan, you will note that Mr. Joseph did identify concern with regard to particular types of users that are not prohibited by the redevelopment plan and your zoning, that he has a concern could influence the outcome of the utilization of parking. And that has to do with an overlap on Friday evening or Saturday evening of food and beverage operations that include liquor service, bar service, a tavern, so to speak, or fine dining, table-type service where people will be there for a longer period of time and can have higher parking demands. I had an opportunity to speak with Mr. Giosa, I do agree with him. Those types of uses, a bar, tavern, alcohol service, table service type restaurant, could have those types of higher parking demands. And as a result, even though the redevelopment plan really doesn't call that out separately and is properly parked at the 4 per thousand, we are prepared to preclude or exclude those types of uses. And what we're proposing as a condition of approval, should this board agree to approve this project, is that for the retail space on the site, we would specifically include fast food restaurants, which is a definition, has a definition in your ordinances, bar, tavern, and/or alcohol service, and restaurants with table service. Will all be excluded as a permissible use in the retail space. And then in addition, we would agree to that any eating establishments, such as what we've described as the food hall, which I think earlier on we described Mr. Stoller's vision of trying to showcase some local vendors here and provide their ability to prepare foods off-site and have them available here for people to walk in and purchase. We would recommend, we would propose a maximum of 30 seats within the retail space. So with that, and Mr. Joseph can speak for himself, I can convey that at least my understanding of talking to him is he's comfortable with, and I agree with it, that we've excluded the types of uses that probably could exceed the parking availability of the site. So we would agree to that as a whole, and if I need to read that text back into the record, let me know. So from that standpoint...
Could I ask a question, please?
Sure.
Are you recommending then that the site would exclude those businesses? Aren't those the businesses that might be most successful there?
Mm-hmm.
A part of the idea of the redevelopment plan being a mixed-use building was to try to attract successful businesses to the area.
Yeah,
It seems
no,
to me that those might be
all
the...
food service type, it excludes the ones that are more intense. Tavern bars that would have a higher parking standard, sit-down table service type parking, uses that have a higher parking standard to it. So it excludes a small segment of the types of uses that Mr. Giosa was concerned with, but it doesn't exclude the luncheonette type or the food hall type vision that Mr. Stoller has. So there still gives us a wide variation of opportunities to provide the types of retail uses we want to market the site to. And we're comfortable, because we don't even think the size of the space is large enough for those other types of uses that we're concerned with. It is a rather small space, 300 square feet.
Did I miss medical in that mix at all?
I mean, office is permitted in there. Again, a 2,300 small medical space is not a large space.
Doesn't medical change up the requirement for?
It doesn't for the redevelopment plan.
Per the redevelopment plan, but in reality, doesn't it do that?
Depends. I mean, this is a 2,300 square foot private practice office building. He's not going to have a lot of outpatient services. He's not going to have a lot of medical equipment. So I don't think it would fall in line with a medical office building type standard.
Well, it could be a lab or a physical therapy type situation. That gets a pretty good amount of cars. People turn over quickly, 45 minutes. Would you be willing to stipulate no medical as part of the, or medical or other more intensive physical therapy type? It's just a question. So I believe this came up on the Seymour Street review where, at least I was advised from someone who had been involved in the negotiations, that office space was the consideration the entire time, and now it appears there's a more intensive medical use in that building, which may skew some of the available parking. And forgive me if I missed this, because I did come in late. Weren't we going to do a review of the entire parking deck before we got into the specifics of this? Or is that not on the table?
Yeah, what you did miss, as I said, I'd certainly like to work together with this board, like we always have, and the concerns really were all about many, many different aspects of the garage, which you could talk about for a long time. So we decided that we will take on the brunt of a more expensive approach with valet and with mechanical parking, which we'll go through in a moment. Nothing like the Orange Road deck with 6 stories, just simple stackers. And so there'll be no use of the garage.
No use of the garage, okay. I think I missed that. My apologies.
Right. Well,
Well, I believe the
consideration
garage-
to your point.
But there's still a variance from
Yes.
needed spots that are not
Yes.
being provided within the building itself.
Correct, because of the
Right.
application of the RSIS, which really hasn't been used in any of the other redevelopment projects in Montclair.
Well, people who come to the commercial space, the retail, where are the customers going to park?
So they would be permitted to park in the deck.
Wait, which,
Would be part of the valet operation.
which deck are you talking?
Our building.
Okay.
They would park in the MC residence, as I said, providing the supply for it. The site plan, and you've seen, has been revised slightly, so from the under-building parking, you could access directly into the lobby for the residents, and there is also a direct connection back out to the street so that you can get to the retail uses. So we've accounted for the ability for somebody to park in the deck and go to the various uses that the building offers. Valet operation, somebody coming in that's either visiting or going to the retail would be given a valet ticket, and then depending upon how the operation is decided to be operated, they will either be validated by the vendors inside the food hall, if that is what comes to pass in the retail, or they could be charged. It depends on how they decide to operate it, but it would be in accordance with whatever is occurring in the area.
I would say, just even before hearing the rest of it, which of course I want to hear, that I think it's an improvement to have access to the parking for people who are using business, because it seems in the past that those are the people who got least attention. And the building, of course, is meant for both tenants and for so I find that to be an improvement, but then I have a concern that until this point, we've always talked about 96 spaces being available as the accepted number that would be comfortably needed. And in order to settle for less spaces, it seems that we're sacrificing the kinds of uses that have been most successful in terms of attracting clients to a business. So I'm listening, but I'm a little concerned so far.
So let me back up a little and clarify that. So the 96 spaces that we've talked about in the past is a requirement with the current redevelopment plan. It doesn't mean it needs them. The real difference here is buying in the residential site improvement standards. The residential site improvement standards was adopted by the DCA back in the late 1990s.
I understood that.
It is a statewide standard that if I were to build this same building out down in Salem County or Cape May
I understood
County,
that. I understood that
So it
presentation.
is set for higher levels of parking absent an urban environment with higher levels of transit. So your own master plan and your various redevelopment plans have recognized that those standards really are not appropriate for Montclair, and have identified the more appropriate standards, which is in that 1.1 range, which is showing up in most of the redevelopment.
I understand the presentation, but what I'm saying is that it seems in order to make that lower standard work, it requires that you eliminate an awful lot of types of businesses that could be there, and that I'm not so comfortable with.
No, it doesn't, because that's purely related to the residential. We are not asking for a deviation from your parking standard for the commercial. Your parking standard for the commercial is 4 spaces per 1,000, which requires 9 spaces. We are accommodating the 9 spaces. In fact, at the end of the day, we have 13 additional spaces left over, so we have some extra spaces that could accommodate some fluctuations in parking demand. But for the 46 units proposed and the 2,230 square foot of retail space, we are parking in accordance with the redevelopment plan for the retail space, and we're asking for deviation for the residential space. And with that, we're providing 73 spaces or 13 excess spaces on this site.
But backing that up to what the board has to decide, it seems to me that in accepting that compromise, that you're asking us to also, in a coordination with that, to limit certain businesses, which, even though they may not have come out in the exact number of spaces that the standard required, may in fact be a handy number to use for the type of businesses that would be profitable there for the town.
Correct. We are responding to your consultant's practical concern with regard to a couple of type uses, particularly purveyors of alcohol, bars, taverns, and/or table service restaurants. He has expressed a concern to us and to this board that those types of uses can be outside the norm. He has recommended that we restrict them. We worked with him to identify how we could craft a proper condition of approval that could be understood by your zoning officer and could be crafted by this board to restrict the particular uses that he believes, and I concur, could fall outside the anomaly. So this is purely a recommendation by your
I will
consultant that we're
be
concurring
pleased
with.
to hear from him, because I didn't quite see it that way when I read it. I said that there were certain businesses that could not be there, but he didn't say that he
And I'll let
recommended
Mr.
that we
Joseph
should not
speak for
do it.
himself.
That's
I
right.
would
I'd
also
like to hear
add,
that.
on behalf of the ownership, first of all, bars, forget about it. We certainly
Well,
wouldn't want
bars is
one.
not what I'm arguing for. I'm just saying
But
that there's
that was in
such a
his
of
list, right.
Can't use medical, can't use restaurants, certain kinds. I'm just listening.
Yeah, well,
But
the
I am
medical-
getting concerned that perhaps there is a connection between limiting the spaces, reducing the spaces, and the practical success of any business that might be allowed to be there, so.
So we certainly want it to be successful. We have
I'm
a
sure
lot of
we all
experience
do,
in town,
yes.
but just
Most certainly.
to your point on it, fast food we wouldn't do. There is a lot of table service restaurant in the area, and what's lacking, and why we think this type of food use would be great, what's really lacking is casual food, pick up and go. I mean, an example, I'm not, it all involves, so I'm certainly not giving a plug, but a place like Louisa that was opened on Walnut, something that's very casual, something that for the neighborhood is very pedestrian-oriented, for parents, for folks who live there, for the workers in the first phase. If you think about their choices of food now, there's a sit-down restaurant in the first phase, and it doesn't really, we have to go out to Bloomfield Avenue to do something like that. So we think it would be very, very successful. There are certainly other types of retail users. We just think this would be a real home run for the area and for the building, and
Okay,
we've got a lot of experience. We know we think that would work very well.
Okay, I would like to let you proceed. I was just concerned.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just have a question. What is a food hall, for the record?
I'll let Mr. Stoller try to describe it, because it's basically multi-vendors inside the 2,300 square feet, multi-counters. No real preparation there. You have your area vendors or food purveyors that would be able to showcase some of their product here and have it available for the walk-in type casual take and go.
Yeah, we actually, to the point, it's a good question, it's a great question. We actually met with and surveyed, if you will, quite a few Montclair food operators and proprietors. And their biggest concern when they want to grow is it's hard for them to grow in Montclair because they don't have the capital necessary to open up another location and be completely responsible for that, unless they do something completely different. So having the opportunity to just bring food over here and to make it available to the public without having to have that level of investment, number one. Number two, for the public, it creates, especially for the pedestrian, it creates a great type of attraction to say, let's go over there because I know they have 4 or 5 different local vendors. And I already made one comment that some could call it plug. It isn't. It's just a good example. But there's literally 8 or 10 other folks in town right now who own food establishments who are very interested in the idea where they're just going to bring over what they offer and make it available without having to set up a new kitchen and so forth. Now, there will be warming and there will be equipment for them to serve their food, but we think that that's a home run opportunity. It doesn't exist in Montclair. It's very much become something that's being included in many, many redevelopment projects, not just around New Jersey, but around the country. It's actually the hottest food type of concept that's really developed in these mixed-use developments and local downtowns.
So they would be taking their food by a vehicle of some sort, a truck or panel truck or
Probably a van or...
a van or car?
Well,
something
no
like
different
that.
than supplies that any restaurant would
Yeah,
get.
but you're saying you
which is-
get multiple
Right,
different
well,
vendors.
but it's
so they'd
actually
have multiple
less,
different-
because I'm sorry, it's actually less, because instead of each and every food component being delivered, even if it was one vendor.
It's a finished product.
It's a finished product. And again, it doesn't have to be exactly that. There may be some folks who want to make something on-site, and it will be accommodated in our plan and in mechanical engineering to make sure that they have the ability to make whatever they want. But we just think it's a fabulous use for the building and for the neighborhood. There are a lot of people living, working, and otherwise involved, and in the hotel. There are a lot of folks within one block, and that was the original design of the redevelopment plan, from what I can remember, when we first worked on it. And we think this is a good way to solve for that in a certain way for food.
Gentlemen, both of you, I can't say that I disagree with anything that you've said about what you're looking to put there. And I've listened to what you said about how we should view the parking and what we should consider in making our determination. One of the things that has been troubling me, not only with this application, but with all of the applications that we're hearing, is there are really some special conditions that you're looking for us to attach to this building, like valet parking. And I guess the scope of that is that, on one hand, it really addresses the issue, or could address the issue as you're laying it out now, but right now there's no building there, and we're going to approve a building to be constructed, which is different than working with something that's already there and trying to adaptively reuse it or modify it. So we're contemplating, with the plan that you're presenting to us, putting up a building that's going to require, for Montclair, it's going to require some very unique accommodations to it, in that it's going to have 70-some-odd spaces that are going to be valet parked, or at least 68 spaces that are going to be valet parked 24/7. And that's just for, theoretically, it's just for the people who live in the building and commercial tenants. Questions pop up about, well, how many tenants are going to be here, and where are the people who come to visit those tenants? Where are they going to park? Easy answer is, okay, we have these parking decks that are around. But we're still trying to sort out, again, even though we're trying to skirt around the issue this evening, we're still trying to sort out whether or not, real space still exists in the parking decks, and how that functions going forward with all the demands that are being placed on it. The other thing that troubles me a little bit about the valet parking, exclusive valet parking, is that, going forward, what if that becomes a financial issue 5 years from now or 10 years from now? We understand it's expensive, but what if the commercial space, as you're putting it forth, it's the hottest thing now, but we all know how hot things burn out and get cool. And then, so what goes in there next? And then how do you deal with that? And then, is the valet parking going to be such a burden on the building that rental is going to be an issue? And if we put these conditions, and we attach these conditions to this building now, and then say 10 years from now, the new owners of the building come in and they say, hey, planning board, we've got this building, it's only got but so much space here, we have this commercial space that we can't, we need all this parking for, and we can't find a tenant for it, and, we have a hardship, we can't, it's established here, what do we do about that? And then that planning board 10 years from now is going to be dealing with something like this, and it's kind of going to be painted into a corner with this building with these accommodations. And if for some reason the accommodation or the requirement or the condition becomes untenable, 10 years from now, then I don't know what kind of price the town is going to have to pay as a result of that. These are all questions here that I know are going to be hard for you to give me a precise answer to. But these are the things that are coming up as I'm listening to the testimony, coming up in my mind, what I'm concerned about. Because it's not just today, it's not just the current tenant and the current plan, it's going forward in the future. And we're dealing with buildings now where we're being presented, well, here's this building and we have to make this accommodation because it's this shape and it's this size and this oddly shaped building that we're going to put, this combined use, commercial and residential use into it, is going to be that building 10 years from now when the new owners, because you're not going to own it forever, It's not going to, and then things are going to happen, times are going to change, and, I think we have to at least give some consideration to how the changing time might impact what we're approving today.
Well, I would just like to comment because we have actually addressed all those. Your questions are always pretty insightful and no different here. Guests is definitely included. We have to include guests. We can't rely on people going elsewhere. Now, would they go elsewhere? Maybe in certain events they could, but our plan is to permit guest parking just like any of the other projects they're involved in. That's where the standard, that's why it's more than one. And as a transit-oriented town, what we're seeing in our involvement here is that many folks don't have the car because it's just too expensive, and that's just changing constantly on the downward side. Nobody's adding cars. They're all pretty much taking them away whenever they can. And one of the things that we found when we first were planning Valley and Bloom is we talked about a shuttle. Some of you folks may remember that, and we were going to partner with the Department of Transportation. Janice and I worked on that. Certain politics, you might understand, we weren't able to get it done. And it turns out that a lot of those folks just take the bus because New Jersey Transit got smart, and the bus they don't charge them for to go one stop. I don't know if it's one stop or it's the first section of the run that they call it. I don't know exactly how it's laid out for them, but it's no cost. So we certainly include guests. The second thing is that the valet, we believe, is not going to be a burden now or in the future because, first of all, people will pay. They would have paid to the Orange Road deck if we went there. They're going to pay here for parking. And for valet, it's actually an amenity. It's actually an improvement. And it's actually something that you can't get elsewhere in Montclair for residential. One thing that I remember at Sienna, because those were condos and they were pretty expensive, is people were saying, well, where's the valet? Well, the problem in a condo is if you say I want a valet, then you have to charge more, and then the board says, well, I don't know, I want it, she doesn't want it, he doesn't want it. So we think that's an amenity. And as far as the commercial, again, it's pretty small, and the 4 per 1,000 has worked very well from what we've seen in the other developments. It's just that Jerry Joseph, which again we agreed had particular concerns about only certain uses. So to your points, wanted to make sure that you realize we addressed those. And we think 10 years later, well, the only thing that's going to happen is the transit's going to increase. New Jersey Transit's going to figure out better how to have trains that work and that are on time and so forth. And as far as locally, there will be probably shuttles at some point. There will be some sort of additional multi-mode from our work on the New Jersey Bike Walk Coalition. We have a meeting with them actually with the bid actually next week. So we don't think that the car use goes up. We think that it goes down. And we certainly think financially it works. And I want to point out what I said before. We didn't want to have to go down this road because it was more expensive to purchase the equipment and so forth. But we really think it works very well. We wouldn't propose anything if we felt it was just a way to move forward but wasn't successful. So I mean that sincerely.
I have a kind of deconstruction question. Simple. Why can't you adhere to the requirements of the plan and reduce the density accordingly to hit that? Why do we have to give parking variances instead of you accommodating that by space and size?
Well, part of the answer is the parking standard is high. So providing parking...
Let's say it's not high. Let's say that is the plan. The plan says X. It asks you to adhere to a certain requirement. why aren't you adhering to that requirement without any variances and creating the appropriate size building accordingly?
Again, because we would be taking on and building parking spaces that are not going to be used and paying for those spaces, the cost of those spaces. So you're building a deck and parking spaces for nothing. So in this case,
That's not,
we're right-sizing
that's
the
not an
parking.
answer. The plan says one thing, and you're asking us to give you a substantial variance. I'm saying, why don't you just adjust the density to adhere to the requirements in the plan?
Because from an owner's standpoint, it makes no sense to build parking spaces that are not going to be used. There's no efficiency to doing that. And what our position and proposal is that the right parking standard is what should be used. Not just because the RSS was written into the plan for whatever reason, doesn't mean that's the right parking standard. The right parking standard has been well recognized in this municipality.
Shouldn't you be lobbying the council to change the redevelopment plan then? Rather than asking us to make a variance?
That is an avenue. However, I believe proofs that we have before this board and the fact that you have your master plan, the other redevelopment plans in the area, including Haynes, which is basically a block away, as well as the original redevelopment plan for this site, creates the necessary proofs for this board to make that decision.
You see, like, the zoning board is constantly asked to make, accommodations to setbacks and to usage, and they are actually much tougher than we are. We're looking at the totality of things. The zoning board follows the rules that have been set. And, at a certain point, I mean, I don't know how my colleagues feel, but I'm like, at what point do people adhere to the plan itself? We had a whole big fight about what the plan really said. At what point do you adhere to the plan, and if the plan's not right, get the appropriate body to adjust the plan, rather than put it on us to grant a substantial variance? That's just how I'm...
All right, well, you asked us that question. I'd like to respond to you more,
Please.
and I really think it's an appropriate point to raise. The fact is, there's not a single multifamily residential project in Montclair with RSIS. There's not a single project that either has that standard or there were existing buildings. And my point is that to artificially reduce the size of a building, it's already down from 6 stories to 4 stories, to artificially reduce it down to a point where it's not just economically infeasible, it's just bad planning. To say we're going to put in twice the number of parking spaces that are ever going to be used. And it's never been needed. So it would be one thing, and I agree, and if it was unique, to use that word again and said, everybody else in town is RSIS for all the multifamily. That's one thing. But we already know, and besides the proofs, we know by practical experience that it works the way it is with the other projects. I think it's somewhat of an aberration that this is included if somebody wanted to use it. But I don't think it's because it's needed.
Not disputing your position on this, which is a fine argument. My point is, the time to make that call was with the council at the redevelopment plan. I mean, you rushed in your project at the point in time when there was discombobulation in the density, and we're now adhering to the higher density because of the plan language at the time. It seemed to me you had a perfect opportunity to lobby the council to make a plan adjustment at that point in time, but you didn't.
Well, actually, it's not what happened. What happened was this board provided your opinions, and the council passed an amendment to the redevelopment plan in, I believe, December of 2017.
Well,
We applied,
there was
just to say the point, we
discombobulation.
applied in August of 18. So,
Mr. Schwartz, respectfully, you're raising, legitimate points, but what I would say from a legal response is obviously the redevelopment plan contemplates a number of potential uses and site designs and couldn't foresee every available avenue, which is why it gives the planning board the flexibility to consider deviations. And what I would suggest at this point is you've heard from Mr. Pankey speak to this, but obviously there's other considerations, including the board's own parking consultant. We also have a professional planner who will eventually testify to proofs in support of the deviation we're requesting. So we would just ask that the board keep an open mind and consider all of that testimony that we're going to give, rather than approach from the perspective of the redevelopment plan says what it says, and there's no deviations from what it says, because obviously that seemed, or at least I would argue legally, that's not consistent with the mission of the jurisdiction of the board to consider what is the best in terms of sound planning for any particular site. And the board is certainly within its authority allowed to consider reasonable conditions to ensure an appropriate use of a site, and that's sort of a little bit of what Mr. Penke was testifying to, and we can explore that more as the testimony continues.
Again, all legitimate points are, it just seems to me that, the time to make this argument that the entire parking plan as envisioned by the council was wrong was, way back when. We're now looking at a plan that allocates a certain amount of parking, and you're asking for a certain amount of density as a result of that, and it's putting it on us to grant you a very substantial and unique variance, as the chair has indicated. I'm just, we always seem to be in this situation. I mean, you can get somebody to come up here and testify that, the moon is square, for parking. Anyway, I think you got my point, and
I understand, but we may respectfully disagree on the substantial nature of the request, but I believe there'll be more testimony that'll speak to this.
Just to make sure you were clear on what I was saying, we had nothing to do with that amendment. We didn't come in, we didn't have any application or anything. We only found out it was even amended a number of months later when the owners came to us and we said, well, it has this particular type of mixed use that's available. There's an RSIS standard. Didn't really make any sense because there is no other project in town for multifamily that has it, but we said, we think there's plenty of space in the garage, let's go that way. So we don't think, and we would never be proposing something that isn't proven already in Montclair. So to Mr. Troutner's point, we'd like to continue on, but that's really our answer.
we don't know what the council was thinking at the time, because they clearly put something in that we're now being asked to follow, and they put something in about density that became confusing. So, I stand by my point that there's a plan. It uses a particular standard. You disagree with that standard. You think it's too onerous. Okay, but that's what the council put in.
And to that, again, I don't mean to argue with you tit for tat, Mr. Short. Certainly, we're going to be more testimony, but from a legal standpoint, my position is the council also wrote into the redevelopment plan the ability for the planning board to consider deviations to ensure sound land use planning for whatever project was going to come in front of this board, obviously with the inability to predict the future as to what each project might look like and the components of it. So that's really what we're asking the board to look at.
I have a question. Do tenants have to valet, or is it optional? Not everyone loves valet.
So the deck is fully valeted, so anyone parking in the deck is attended to by a valet.
Deck, when you
No,
say
no, no.
deck, what do you mean?
The garage.
On the garage.
Oh, the garage.
building,
No.
Anyone entering this building is valeted.
No, if I was a tenant moving in and you said you have to valet your car, and what if I don't really want to? I don't,
It would come into your consideration.
then you
as to whether
then you
wanted to
take rent?
If you didn't want to rent the unit because of that, yes.
So you have to valet.
It's the
Okay.
same thing if you didn't like the view from your window. You wouldn't take it.
Or you would live there without a car.
When we approach, just to answer another good question, we have a lot of access to get tenant information and to see what the desires are. It is something, I said it about Sienna, elsewhere, that doesn't exist, whereas many buildings in other locations have it. And so we're really going to be somebody, a best choice if that's what they're looking for, and they can't get it today. Because the reverse is difficult. If you were to say to another operator of a garage in another project with multifamily, I'd like you to valet my car, and they don't have the valet, then they can't really do it. So we think for this particular building, which is a bit boutique, it's smaller, it's really going to be sort of a specialized type of use. Plus, we also have, as I think we talked about in the architectural testimony, about 1/3 of the units are much larger units that are really designed for empty nesters. One of the things this town is missing as well is a place for somebody to downsize to if you have a house but you still want your family to come visit at holidays during the year. So, those larger units, they are extremely excited, those types of tenants, about the idea of valet.
At what point would we talk about queuing up, where cars queue up to valet? Would that be with you or the parking expert?
I can touch on that, but Mr. Sokich is also here, that he can pull on it, but the design,
Press and hold. Did the light go? It's on. The light went on.
Hello? So the design
It's
is
here.
set up in order to provide a queue area inside the garage floor level. We would have the ability to queue up to 4 vehicles in the lower level aisle. You could actually queue on the inbound if that had to happen, but actually, we have more than enough space for 4 vehicles. Mr. Sokich is more than comfortable that that provides the ability to accommodate those vehicles as a valet moves them in and out of the site.
In the valet.
So the ADA spaces are self-parked, so the valet would be watching for somebody that comes in that is ADA and wants to get to that, and would be moving the vehicles so that those spaces can be accessed by somebody in an ADA vehicle. So that is something that we've looked at. Mr. Sokich can talk further about it. He's considered it in his plan that was submitted with the application, and it is something that would be part of the valet operation.
So while you're there, thank you. Can you just point out, I don't know whether or not you're going to testify, whether you're supposed to testify about this or somebody else, can you just point out where the machines, the double stackers, what spaces they're going to occupy?
So if you've read the site plan, you'll see that all of the spaces are labeled, and there's 2 spaces. So all of the straight standard spaces are all stackers. There's 30 of them, basically, that handle the 2 stacks.
Right, and the spaces that have the dotted lines around them?
Those are spaces that are moved in the aisles.
Okay. With valet parking, theoretically, is it possible to double stack more than what you've got indicated there?
Yes.
Without a problem?
So from the standpoint of what you could actually physically do, Mr. Sokich, when he first looked at that, was confident and came back with a plan that actually had more spaces. We rationalized it with him and are presenting to the board that we are confident that 73 spaces are very comfortably handled. Quite frankly, if for some reason he needed to, he has the ability to put in additional spaces.
If you're going to, and see, if you're going to propose that this be valet parked, like we've had presented to us on other applications, where they haven't been shy about double stacking cars, I mean, it looks like there's room for more to be put in here without causing a problem for a valet to move the cars around. And then the question becomes exactly what kind of capacity are we talking about then?
There could be more. We don't need that.
But you're asking for a variance. So that's the question. If you look at it from one standpoint, if we buy your argument, yes, you don't need them. But you only don't need them if we're giving you a variance or a waiver. Okay? So, if you didn't but for that variance or waiver, how many spaces could you reasonably put on the site?
So the plan that Mr. Sokich looked at had between 4 and 6 additional spaces in the valet that he was comfortable was a workable plan before we dared it to 70.
Mr. Chairman, just so I'm clear, so Mr. Sokich is going to speak to this, is if it's the board's request, we can obviously have Mr. Sokich testify about how that 73 could go north in terms of what you're saying, which is we've shown a comfortable conservative number of stacking in the aisles, but we could show it with
Well, I'm curious because we've had other presentations, given to us about valet parking where they've been double stacked and triple stacked and it's been packed to the gills, all right? And that's been what we've been asked to approve, okay? So why is this different, And I understand from a certain standpoint that, this is a conservative, but I see if you've got a valet, if you've got a 24/7 valet, I see a lot of other empty space that potentially could be used that might put that waiver that you're asking for in a different light, and with that, I have another question beyond that, and that if you were to do more stacking, since this is under the building, we also have to take into consideration whether it presents a fire issue. If something happens, whether or not there would be some sort of issue, or whether the fire department would be uncomfortable with packing cars like that underneath a building. So that, again, just trying to look at the whole 360 here, to see what we're actually looking at, because if those are the spaces that you're saying that you've got with the double stack, you almost don't need a valet. You need some, it's almost like you just need somebody to operate the one or two, and if you have two cars, you're given a stack, you could park both your cars if you're comfortable operating the lift one, or that's, and I know for other reasons, for other business reasons, you might not want to incur the risk of a tenant or somebody, operating machinery like that. But I'm just saying, there's the space as it's set up is not what I expect to see when you're trying to really pack cars in there. And I come from that frame of reference over in New York, where you pull into the building and you see them packed to the gills, or you go down neck to a restaurant and you pull up in a building that basically was used to be an office building, but now it's hollow and they're parking cars all over the place, and it takes the guy like 5 minutes in order to move the cars around, playing Tetris to get your car out of there. But
just as a response from, again, ownership perspective, the goal here was to provide the very, very best possible parking experience for the tenant. You're 100% right, and Mr. Sokich can tell you, in various different garages, and he manages many of them for a very long time, you could put in a lot more cars. They obviously handle the fire or other issues in other garages. They could handle them here. We wanted number one, the optimal experience for the tenants and the users, and number two, we didn't want to ask this board to be considering something that was extremely intense from a usage perspective. So we went to a very, very conservative number, and we also wanted, to the point about ADA, we wanted it to be very easily handled, only move one car or two cars. They call down, they text in advance. If they pull up, it gets queued for them. So we're really trying to be as conservative as we could.
I hear you.
Certainly
but I'm
easier
trying to, but again, based on other applications that we've looked at, and the amount that we're being asked to adjust, because, we're really being asked to adjust down from 96.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll say I'm pleased to be.
I would like to see a range.
Yeah, I'm
Just
pleased to have this conversation as opposed to quite a different one on this issue, and we're happy to present, a more intense operation that, would still provide for an optimal experience in terms of the building, but speaking to what you're expressing the concerns are.
Yeah, like I said, I would like a 360 view of this, and looking at it from all angles, as opposed to, something that was, and what I'm suggesting is only what, like I said, has been presented to us in other applications.
More spots would probably, you'd need to employ another valet person, parker.
Well, it's a very good point. So to Chairman's point, John, you raised before, we don't want to make this an economic burden for anybody in the future and make it unrealistic. So having to add in substantial more valet for a technical lesser number on an approval, but first of all, it's probably not going to be needed anyway, but the point is that we didn't want to make it something that we didn't think was really realistic, first of all. And second of all, yes, there are others who push the limit. So what we would do is, when Mr. Penke is done, before Mr. Sokich comes up, we'll be glad to have a discussion. He's already told us, with one valet operator on site, what he thinks he can do, which is even more than this. So we'll be glad to come back and show you. And it's a great question, and we'll give you that answer. But
I just kind of look at it as a worst-case scenario.
Absolutely.
Just to, in case, because I know you're saying we don't need it, but what if?
I hear you.
Then,
We'll come back with that after we take a short break after
So
Mr. Penke.
I have a question for you. It's related. I think that you said that you're aware of other new projects in town and the amount of car and parking that these projects require. So, and it was kind of supporting your argument that you thought the 1 per unit or whatever, number 1.1 per unit was an adequate number of parking spots for these units, that you seem to have data. I'm looking for data from other projects to learn what kind of parking is being used by those tenants? Is it a one-to-one ratio? Is it something less?
Right. Well, I didn't bring data, but I
No,
can tell
but
you.
you do have that. Is that, because I think you asserted that that was the case.
Well, Mr. Sokich can tell you what it is for Valley and Bloom. I don't think I can really provide to this board data from other projects and other particular owners to this board, but I can tell you in talking to them, no one's having a problem with the 1.0 or the 1.1. And that's Montclair. You know, you talk about Jersey City and Harrison and other places where the transit's even more intense, they're down to 0.3 and 0.4 and 0.5. In Montclair, the 1.0 to 1.1 has worked very, very well, which is why I think that both, I guess this board must have weighed in with the council when they just revisited the Haynes redevelopment for the Church Street site. They stuck with the ratio again because it just has not been an issue at all.
You have.
I don't have,
Okay.
I don't have data I can submit as evidence from other people's projects. I think,
The throwaway comment that you
yeah,
made.
it's not a throwaway comment. It's the experience of all the different projects in town. And in fact, to be really frank, if we thought this was a problem, it would be the last thing that we would want to do, is to build a project that we couldn't park. That's a difficult situation, and that's something we would never want to have, both with respect to our own business and the fact that we're longstanding developers in town. The other part of this partnership, a very big company, Hampshire Companies, they have a long-time reputation relationship in New Jersey, and nobody would want to build a project where we were insufficient on parking.
And my second question, I know now you feel like you can park on site. Did anybody look to see what available parking there is in the deck that might be open to any overflow needs of this project if it were approved?
No, we frankly gave a lot of thought to what was happening, been before this board many times, and the level of difficulty and, as I said, machinations of multiple different questions and issues was so extreme that it just seemed it wouldn't be fair to anybody, including any of you. It's also not fair to the other owners and operators, which we don't control, of Elcor, who have that garage, and you're asking them to get involved. And even though we are, both Hampshire and our company are involved in the hotel, it's not the same entity. There are other partners involved, and that operates separately. So it really became clear to us we had to be independent.
So with that in mind, how do we ensure, I think somebody mentioned some people don't like stacked parking, how do we ensure that retail or visitors don't use your building to go to where they can, but instead go to the deck? And, do you envision validating from the deck too for retail, or do we have to put a condition in that they can't get a special rate to use the deck? Because I could see, after the approvals are long gone, given the collaboration between the partners, that, that deck is validating too. And suddenly we're getting some of the people that should go to your area over there, which was potentially the purpose of not, of trying to find out who was using the deck, which you have
Very good point.
backed off doing.
So there is no partnership with that ownership and us any longer in ownership of that deck. We can't tell them what to do in any way, shape, or form, which is one of the reasons that, as I said before, we couldn't really continue to present that to you. And I understand that that might be either confusing or something that people don't know. It's not as if we come here every month and give you the updates on what's going on in our business and in others. Number one. Number two, the plan here, and it's a very good question again, the plan is to accommodate retail. In fact, if you saw the plan, we made a pretty significant modification to make a direct walkthrough. So the idea is kind of similar to the retail. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Crescent deck was built in essentially a joint venture with Sienna in the town, 82%, 18%. And the retail tenants pay to let their users go there for a certain minimum, up to 2 hours. So we're probably thinking 1 hour here, because again, we don't have long-term users. Right, in our building, we're thinking probably 1 hour, but after that, they would pay. It's not going to be free, and our own residents are going to pay and get what they want in their own building. There'd be no reason for them to go there.
What I'm saying is, do we need to put a condition that your entity and successors cannot have a side relationship with the other deck to prevent any cross-validation to keep them out of the deck?
That's perfectly fine. We have no intention of ever doing that. I doubt they'd want to do it, get involved, because there's a small number of cars. But we're glad to have that as a condition, because it's not our intention.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, we're glad to do that. Thank you.
Well, we've had quite a few questions. Did we interrupt your direct? Do you have other things that you wanted to cover?
I have a couple questions.
Yes, I think we hit everything, but certainly people are more
Yeah.
questions.
Number one, with the valet parking, how's the car share going to work?
So the valet has the ability to manage that car, so we move it, we'd probably keep it in the space that's least utilized and most available to him, but he has the ability to move it around as he may need to.
Mr. Sokich will respond. ProPark has relationships with all the car share users. They
Okay.
pretty much find it's the only way it works in garages with them.
Okay, and my other question is relating to the parking, the street parking in front of the building. If you saw my memo, right now, our regulations restrict parking in front of the building. There is no parking is permitted. There's a bus stop in front of where you're building. So how do your plans, they don't reflect what our current regulations?
So on approval of this, what we would require to do with the bump out is to have council ultimately amend the ordinance of granting ordinance for short-term rental outdoor pickup on the site with the pull-out. I think this board agrees to approve the pull-out.
But there's-
Indicated, if you don't want to pull out, we'll put it back to the curb.
But there's a bus stop there, right in front of.
Northbound, there actually isn't a signed bus stop. It's on the southbound side that the bus stop is. The northbound bus stop for the 134, whatever it is actually down by Church Street.
Well, but there is, but according to our regulations, there's a bus stop.
But it's not consistent with the signage that's in the field and what's happening in the field. So there's a lot of inconsistencies. We looked at the ordinances too. Ultimately, the township probably has to go through and update the signage.
Well, I guess this is a question, because right now, where you show, where you show the loading area, the pull-off area, not the loading area,
So
the
just
pull-off
pull out.
area.
It's
That's-
driveways.
You're,
The current driveways.
The gas station.
right,
Yeah.
that's a bus stop.
So I
That's-
don't allow the
Well,
bus to
the
stop
bus
in
can't, in
driveways.
front of a driveway.
Yeah,
Well, what we've testified to
Right.
before, is that we like, and I think there was a straw poll of the board, that a pull-out area makes sense, especially with the number of drop-offs and car share, Uber rides that people are taking. It's up to the council to decide if they want to make those parking spaces as opposed to just drop-off. And I know some of the residents have spoken, and I've spoken to some of the residents. They'd love to see even the west side of Orange Road become resident-only, and we hope that the council will look at that. But up to us, we're just talking about drop-off, and if the council wants to
I
adjust
guess,
it, it's
I
up to
guess
them.
it's also important to bear in mind is the area in front of the Orange Road parking deck. That's also prohibited for parking except for certain periods of the day when it's used exactly as you said, as a drop-off area.
And again, that's not the signage in the field, it's no parking whatsoever, so the town probably needs to go through and either update its ordinances or update.
Well, I
parking.
believe that was a relatively, one of the relatively new ordinances, that the sign
So then
was
they
never
need to-
put in
They
place.
need to update their signage.
So
We're okay
I
either
guess
way.
The reason I'm throwing that out is perhaps because that's a short-term drop-off area, perhaps the drop-off area would be in front of the parking deck instead of right in front of your building.
Well, obviously in front of the building makes sense from a planning and design standpoint because of the location and adjacency to the residents where you have that type of activity occurring and our ability to create that pull-out area. So we think that makes some sense rather than having it removed
Okay.
in front of the Orange Road deck. But, as we've indicated to the board, if they wish to eliminate the pull-out, we can do that.
I thought it was the testimony of our Mr. Danemeyer that said that the pullout or pull-in, I guess it is.
Pull-out.
Whatever. It's better not to have that from a safety point of view, because seeing cars parked in front, right on the curb line, forces people to drive slower. I mean, I think that was your testimony. So to be, that testimony was after we did our little straw poll. So I was wondering if maybe my colleagues' minds might be changed if they think that it's safer not to have this pull-out, pull-in, and have a wider sidewalk, which I would find very attractive.
Well, again, it's 18 feet even with it, and we still
I know, but
believe
it's 30
that-
feet without it.
We still believe it's safer for a drop-off to occur outside the lane of traffic. That's just our opinion, obviously your engineer.
Our expert said it's not safer for that. And I believe it forces traffic that is going down Orange Road to slow down.
I don't think so.
I have a question. So when you're pulling into the driveway, there's these two flower beds, these raised, these raised.
Correct.
Okay, so making a right turn into the garage, is that a little tight there?
No, so
No?
the planting beds are actually back in here, away from the curbs, and the driveway's all been set with proper geometry to accommodate the types of vehicles that we have.
Okay.
Do you have any vehicle size restrictions on the parking stackers?
No, Mr. Sokich could talk, but certainly like a 10 probably about the end of the garage, but most SUVs and vehicle mix on the road bags would be accommodated in this garage.
Like an Escalade?
Yes, and that would be a bigger vehicle that they keep in the parking lot, so it's not a height issue.
Okay.
Well, it's basically-
Any other questions from the board?
I just had a comment, I can't resist. You make the statement on page 2 that this area has a good proximity to transit options, yet the 2 train stations are over a mile away. So I can't see people walking to these train stations.
Well, you've got great bus service here, and then you do have access to the train, and as Mr. Stoll was just pointing out a minute ago, you actually have a bus service that has a free
Yeah, what
one-stop
bus
shop.
service is that? I never heard of that.
I'm not sure which it is. I know the people at Valley and Bloom use it. New Jersey Transit, I guess, got smart and realized that they can feed their own train stations
So
better.
it's, okay.
It's called, again, I don't remember what it's called. It's the first, it's up to, I don't know if it goes just to Pine Street, but I think it's...
Zone?
First zone, maybe
First
they call it.
zone?
Yeah, something
That's
like
free,
that.
huh?
It's become very popular, as far as we know. Taking the bus to the train, because it's so short, it's only like, yeah, I
Enough.
mean, but
Wait.
by bus, I mean, it's such a quick ride.
Oh, yeah,
that,
yeah.
Other questions? Any questions from the public of these witnesses who've been testifying?
The neighbor's not here. That makes me...
Good evening, William Scott. The testimony from Mr. Stoll in regards to the development, and there was some back and forth with Mr. Swart in regards to that. Back at the development review committee,
You're not being picked up on the
Assume your
microphone.
mic may not be on.
the lights. Now it's on. Okay, it's bright green. Okay. During the October 4th, 2018 Development Review Committee meeting, there was quite a bit of conversation about the density. And I was going to hold my question and present it as a comment at the end of the hearing, but since it came back up again, I wanted to take the opportunity to ask Mr. Stoll a question. And the reason I want to pose the question, because during that back and forth, and it was a lengthy conversation, and there was a question about possibly letting this application go back to the council for review. And my recollection is that Mr. Stoller did not support that. You can go back and listen to the tape, but that's my recollection, because it was apparent that there was a concern about the density. Now, being the co-chair of the Housing Commission, when the density
You mean
went...
putting the plan back, not the application?
Beg your pardon?
The council doesn't review the application.
Well, no, my statement was, during that conversation at the review committee meeting, there was a response by Mr. Stoller that he wasn't in favor of letting the application or the redevelopment plan go back to the council.
The plan, that's what I'm saying.
Yes,
You
the
said
plan.
the application.
Excuse me, the plan.
Okay. Just a clarification.
And obviously, well, the plan was being presented at that review committee meeting at that point, so it was the plan in addition to the development review committee. So I think there was a concern there. That concern still exists. Obviously, as I started to state from a housing commission standpoint, from a density standpoint, we can even go back further to November the 17th, November of 2017, when this redevelopment plan was being reviewed. And matter of fact, I think I pointed out or had posed a question about the density, and I was wondering if the density went up from 18 units to whatever number, and I was assured that that was not going to be the case. Because if the density went from 18 units to whatever the case was going to be, we were looking for a commitment to abide by the obligation of a 20% set-aside for this project. So since this was opened up tonight, I guess I've got a little bit of a head start to pose a couple of questions in regards to the density. And my final comments were going to be, this plan should go back to the council. You guys have done your job. You started out over 2 years looking at this plan in this redevelopment area. You made your recommendations, and for whatever reason, there was an oversight on the council's behalf. And now, as Mr. Swartz just stated, you guys got to make the decision as to move forward with this plan. So I just
Mr. Scott,
wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, I hear you, and we had a discussion at the beginning of this hearing about issues that occurred. And just like a court of law that cannot defer or refuse to make a decision on a law because it thinks that it should go back to Congress for Congress to reconsider it, we as the planning board are not in the position to say we cannot hear this application or make a decision on this application because we think that an issue that should more rightfully be addressed at the council level. We are being presented with a redevelopment plan that has been approved by the council. We have discussed and debated the meanings of the various density levels, and we're not going to go through that again. That's because we're not going to come up with a different answer this evening on that. So it is what it is, and we have to make our decision on this application as it comes for us under the terms and conditions of the redevelopment plan as it is currently structured.
And I completely understand Chairman Nguyen, but as it was stated tonight, if there's going to be variances applied to this application that allows this application to be very unique, okay, a smaller application or smaller density would probably allow this project to fit just as nicely into the area.
I don't disagree with what you're saying. It's quite possible that that could be the case. That same statement applies to every application that comes before us that wants a variance, all right? So that's a given. Again, we start with that, and then we go on. So, there's nothing more that we can say about that other than the fact that, yeah, that is quite a possibility. Now we have to look at the merits of the arguments that are being presented to us, because the law provides that despite the fact that there are limitations with respect to densities and sizes and the full gamut of what the municipal land use law covers, the law also provides for planning boards to grant variances given proper cause.
Thank you. Okay. Take care.
Other questions?
My name is Phil Cantor. I'm the Vice President of the Montclair Center Business Improvement District and the co-chair of the Parking Committee. The density downtown is something that we do support along with smart development, because density means more vibrant shopping district. I do have a question about the shared space, because you're allowing 6 spots, you're calling it 6 spots. So how does that work with, like, if we're you talked about that there were 13, overflow of 13 spots. So, but one of them is actually, 6 of those spots is actually in 1 spot.
That's right. So what the redevelopment plan provides for is that if the owner maintains basically a zip car on site, the zip car is available to serve the needs of residents within this building. And as a result of providing and making that amenity available, what the redevelopment plan, and actually many jurisdictions have started to recognize, is that's equivalent to a certain number of spaces. In this case, it's equivalent to providing 6 parking spaces. In other words, we're relieving the ability of residents to need several cars.
Right, but in terms of like using those overflow from, say, the food hall, people coming into those 9 spots that you've given to
those are separate and additive to the residential spaces.
The 9 spots are not in that on the map?
They're incorporated in the total 73, but they're not obviated by the 6 spaces, the zip car basically. It's a separate calculation and need for the residents.
Now, since a lot of the conflicts will come at night, or the high usage, peak usage will be at night with shopping, with the tenants being home, has any consideration been given to employee parking? I'm trying to think a little bit out of the box here. One of our big challenges in downtown is where to put employees during the day, and it also causes overflow into residential areas. So has any consideration been given to the spaces that kind of free up during the day to allow for outside uses of from stores and their employees?
No, this is not proposed to be a public deck or open to other users other than occupants of the building.
Is that a possibility?
We have not considered it nor proposing it, particularly since the Orange Road deck, which is a public road deck, is immediately adjacent to the site.
All right, thank you.
But will there be shared spaces for employees of the building, whether they be the parking attendant or employees at the commercial space or the superintendent, janitor, whatever?
Yes, they're in those numbers. They're in the parking numbers. Your parking numbers include all those types of user groups.
Okay.
Is there a doorman or a concierge person
in the residential lobby?
working in the building? No?
No, it's remote, digital, like a lot of the buildings of this size. So there's the support provided. I think we talked about this once before. If there's a move-in, obviously there's going to be
Yeah, I remember
somebody
that.
there for supervision. But other than that, there's tremendous technologies today that cover everything from the coming in, from door locks to access for obviously packages, UPS, all of that.
So what happens when if there's a problem? Let's say the elevator gets stuck. Then where's the person on the other side of that buzzer?
So there's 2, and it provides for that. If there's a problem, there's a way to. First of all, if there was a superintendent there, he's not going to do anything about the elevator. He's not allowed to touch it. So all he's going to do is call one of the elevator company.
Right, but somebody has to let them in the building.
Yeah. Well, those arrangements are made. Like, for example, at Sienna, where there is a person there, they're only there 16-hour shift. They're not there. So if something happens at 2 o'clock in the morning, these arrangements are made. It's a pretty common thing. It's a great question, and that's why there's been so much technology and digital approach to both software and hardware to address those things so there could be immediate access provided, even remotely, for unlocking.
Can you just tell me, are there electric charging stations in the deck of your parking lot?
It is a amenity considered to be included in this site. Exactly where it would be located, we haven't determined yet, but it is something we are anticipating would be included in the garage level.
So your answer is yes, there's going to be an electric charging station?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions from the public, the witnesses? Come forward, sir.
Hi, thanks. I'll be brief. I just wanted to...
Can you identify yourself for the record, please?
My name is Ulysses Della Torre. I live at 27 Valley Road. I've been, whenever I can make these meetings, I try to make them. I haven't made all of them. And every time I come to one of these, I have a lot of opinions in my head, but I respect the fact that I haven't heard. I've been absent for some of them, so I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt to all the parties. I just wanted to register very quickly my agreement with the point Mr. Schwartz brought up about variances and what the point is of having standards if all somebody has to do is show up and say, oh, make me an exception. You know, I mean, I don't know, again, I haven't been present enough, but there's clearly an issue here somewhere, whether it's with you or with the council or with the applicant. Why? Why do we have these if we're not going to follow them? That's all. Thank you.
Well, before we move on, I actually do think Mr. Schwartz raised a good point with RSIS. If we are showing that we are continually not using it, then why is it still being made a part? And I think it's something that we have to look at going forward. We can't retroactively change this, but we do need to look at it going forward, and if it's not being applied consistently to buildings of this nature, then I think, you know, we really need to give some thought to changing the law, the regulations that we're using, so that they're a little more relevant. But we're not going to solve that issue this evening. You have more witnesses. How many more witnesses do you have for this evening?
So we have two more witnesses. Mr. Webb would be brief as our third witness. We have Mr. Sokich, obviously, and I'm guessing the board probably wants to hear from Mr. Giosa, probably maybe next. So.
Okay. Well, I was going to suggest it's 9:15. Maybe we take a 5-minute break before we proceed then with the rest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Troutner.
So, Mr. Chairman, does it make sense at this time for Mr. Giosa to come forward? I feel like some of his commentary related directly to Mr. Pankey's, if that's, appropriate.
Mr. Giosa, come on down. You are our next contestant. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
So, what say you about what you've heard this evening?
Well, I submitted a report on dated February 4th that had some concerns about an intense restaurant use, that in my opinion, it would have overburdened the plan that they proposed. And subsequent to that, the applicant has
Is your mic on, Mr. Giosa? I just want to make sure.
The light is on.
Okay, great. Just didn't sound like I could hear it coming through.
Me too.
Oh, okay, sorry. Subsequent to my report, the applicant has agreed to limit the types of restaurant uses, which would, in fact, reduce the intensity and the demand that would be generated by the commercial space in the project. And since making those changes that they've entered into testimony this evening, I'm comfortable that the project as proposed will have adequate parking.
Let me ask you a question, hypothetically. Let's say one of those commercial uses that's more intense, as you described it, were to be situated on the premises. How much more parking do you think something like that would need over and above what's being provided now?
Well,
and I know ballpark figure. I know this is, not something that you've sat down and pre-calculated.
Yep, I actually did. On the high end, I think that the project could generate a need for 103 spaces on the high end if it were a real, a high-quality destination-type restaurant.
What basis, when you say 103 spaces, that's using what as a multiplier? I mean, is that using the RSIS standard? Is that using Montclair's municipal standard?
It's using Institute of Transportation Engineers Parking Generation Manual. So when the applicant kind of went on their own to say that the RSIS is not appropriate, I thought it kind of opened up the door to saying, okay, what is the actual demand of the project going to be? So, running through the gamut of potential uses of commercial, I know from past experience that there are certain high demand uses that could go into that space, including high turnover sit-down restaurants, destination type restaurants. So I used the Institute of Transportation Engineers factors to to come up with that estimate of over 100 spots. So,
and that's based on the square footage of
based on the square footage, yes. And also, the limiting to the 30 seats was important in my mind to limiting the ultimate use of that space.
So, is that limiting of space, limiting seating, is that a way of offsetting that number that you come up with of 100, even if you had a destination restaurant? For instance, I remember growing up, I can remember two restaurants, one in Verona, I think it's called Mealy's, and then there was another one in Newark on Bloomfield Avenue, I think it was called Seacrest. And those restaurants were that big. And if you wanted to eat there, you basically, showed up, and if it was full, you waited outside in front of the restaurant, rain or shine, until a seat opened up and you went in. And, that wasn't for everybody. You had to really want to eat there or time yourself. So it's like maybe you had a couple, of people standing outside, waiting for a seat. But, it's not like, you're going to have lines around the block because there's too many other options for people to go. So, I mean, even if you had a destination restaurant and you had some famous chef, if you got 30 seats, you got 30 seats, and that's it. You have reservations and, you're seated and reservations are done, and that's it, right?
Right.
So that's a way of offsetting that, right?
Correct.
So really, it's not necessarily the use, but the amount of seating.
Yes.
That's really the critical
Yes.
issue. And so if you limit it to 30 seats, that's within the parking parameters that we're talking about here?
I believe so, yes. That adds a level of comfort to my estimation that they're going to be able to fit them into that deck as they propose the use of the deck.
Gotcha.
Mr. Giosa, it was partially due to reading your report that got me interested in asking the questions that I posed earlier.
Right.
Because the reason why we as a township have been in favor of mixed-use buildings is the goal of attracting successful businesses to town. And we find generally that the ratio of business to residential is really very small. And it would seem helpful to us to at least allow for the possibility of businesses that have been proving to be relatively successful. And I was thinking that in terms of being right next to a hotel, that a really nice restaurant might be a place that was a destination place, and maybe it would be nice to have such a place. So I was not so comfortable with the idea that we should, in fact, forbid successful businesses of that type. And that's why I'm concerned that the parking variance be not one that would dictate that certain businesses that I think would have great potential would not have the opportunity to succeed. We tend to always favor the residential part of it over the opportunities for the business side of it. So I found your report very helpful in looking at that as an issue. But my decision was in the other direction to say, well, how do we get what we can do to support those kinds of businesses?
Right. No, I understand that concern, but I was just kind of doing a black and white calculation.
I understood where you were
Yeah.
coming from, but it got me
Right.
thinking that we really want successful businesses, and so many times we sacrifice the opportunity to do that in order that we can support the residential side of it.
If we did allow kind of those longer sit restaurants but limited it to 30 seats, do we need both the prohibition of those types of restaurants and the 30-seat limit, or can we kind of have one or the other?
Well, I wasn't really considering that question. The applicant had expressed to me what their vision of the space was. I understand what they were going for there. There are places in the city and in the Bronx that I've been to. I could see that space working there. You're at
I
the
don't
hotel,
disagree.
you grab something. So I guess to have a high-quality restaurant limited to 30 seats, I don't see it without alcohol service. They've said that there will not be alcohol service there, so it's kind of an
I think
odd
it's
fit, I
self-limiting
guess.
in a way.
Yeah, I would think so. Without the alcohol service, it would be self-limiting.
I remind my colleagues that the hotel has a restaurant and a liquor license, so it's not like there aren't restaurants right in the immediate area, and I would think
Generally, restaurants attract restaurants, and that's what happens.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that
if you build a restaurant that's good and you have another one next door that's also good, you have, in fact, something that really is.
without a doubt, but Montclair does not have a shortage of restaurants at this point.
And
So-
most of those restaurants don't have liquor service, and they do just fine because everybody brings their own if they want it. And that's, we've gotten used to that because we've got these draconian liquor law in place, liquor license laws in place, so that's, I I don't think that that really impacts the success of a restaurant in Montclair, one way or the other, whether it has a liquor license or not.
I've never raised a liquor license as an issue. In fact,
Yeah.
some say that bring your own is one of the things that attracts people to Montclair.
Yeah.
They can bring their own.
Yeah, you know, get exactly what you want at a reasonable price.
I've not considered license as a problem.
Yeah, but again, it sounds to me like if you limit the seating, then everything else will fall into place in terms of what could possibly use there, and that's because that's really what's determining the parking requirement, the amount of people that you're allowing to occupy the space, at the same time, and limiting the seating limits the capacity for the restaurant, and to a certain extent limits the type of business flow that you can have in there if you're going to have seating. But in any case, does anybody have any other questions of Mr. Giosa?
Yeah. Paragraph 4 of your report, you mentioned that mechanical failures are fairly common with these thingies. What can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's they're mechanical devices, and they do get repeated use over time. They have to be well maintained and serviced, so it's not uncommon that they have mechanical failures.
But you don't see that that's an obstacle to what they're proposing
and
here?
again, I said it would only impact one space at a time. So it's not
two, wouldn't it? Could it?
Well, they could put it in a down position and still use at least one of the spots.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So it would really only impact one spot. So.
Okay.
And typically, they would get it serviced rather quickly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm good. Thank you.
Any other questions of Mr. Giosa? Okay, Mr. Troutner. Thank you.
Thanks. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we'll ask Mr. Sokich from Pro Park America to come forward. He's not previously testified in this matter, so we'll seek to have him sworn in and qualified as an expert in the field of parking management.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your full name for the record, spell your last name.
Kristen Sokich, S-O-K-I-C-H.
Mr. Sokich, I seem to remember you testified in previous matters in this community
I have.
as a parking expert, correct?
Correct.
I think he is the parking expert, parking management expert in Montclair at this point. So yeah, we'll accept him as an expert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, we're good to go.
Thank you. Great. So, Mr. Sokich, just by way of brief background, so how many parking garages, first, where are you employed?
Why do you have to do that?
I just want to get a I know. I'm not seeking to qualify him. I just want to hit a couple points that I'll try and move through quickly.
I'm employed by Pro Park Mobility.
Okay. And how many, in terms of your employment, what are your responsibilities and how many garages do you oversee?
So I'm the Executive Vice President. I oversee the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut metropolitan area. Currently overseeing 150 locations. In my career, I've probably overseen over 500.
Okay. And were you asked by the applicant in conjunction with this matter to prepare a parking plan in conjunction with this application for consideration by the board?
That's correct.
And you're fully familiar with this application as it pertains to the intended use at the subject site for 46 residential units and approximately 2,300 square feet of ground floor retail restaurant space?
Correct.
Okay. And you're aware that this applicant's seeking approval from the board to permit the use of a commercial-grade mechanical parking stacking system in order to, in part, satisfy the township's parking requirements?
That is correct.
And has your experience, which you just mentioned a moment ago, included the management of parking garages that accommodate the types and uses of mixed-use buildings that's proposed by the site, and particularly ones that include mechanical parking stacking systems?
Correct.
Okay. And can Can you describe, based upon the parking plan that you submitted in conjunction with this application, how the applicant intends to accommodate residential and retail uses through the on-site garage through valet parking?
Sure. So the parking is going to be on a valet managed basis. The garage itself can accommodate up to 73 vehicles. 3 of those are going to be ADA spots. One's going to be a shared parking space. Cars will be parked that are long-term will be put up on lifts and in the back of the facility. Short-term cars will be left on the ground and in the front of the facility. When folks come in to park their car, if they're a resident, they'll show their credential. The valet will park the car. If there's somebody going to the retail or a visitor, they'll be issued a valet ticket, asked how long they're going to stay, and then their car will be parked accordingly.
Now, Mr. Sokich, how long have you been working with Stackers in terms of your professional career of managing garages?
Sure. So basically, I've been doing parking for 25 years, and I've had stacked parking on two-post lifts all those years.
And can you just give a little bit of detail in terms of the actual, I guess, physical operation of the lift system that's being proposed in conjunction with this application?
Sure. So it basically takes, once you put a vehicle on the lift, it takes anywhere from like 18 to 25 seconds to raise that car. If you're taking a car down and there's a car parked on the ground space, you're going to have to move that car and then lower the lift. So bringing a car down that has a car in the ground space, you figure 20 seconds for it to come down. It might take another 20 seconds to move the ground space vehicle. It's about a 40-second procedure. Going up, pretty much the same thing.
And these lifts, would they be exclusively operated by a valet on the site?
Correct. So the valets are trained to operate these lifts. I wouldn't recommend the average person to try to use them.
Okay. Now, can you describe the staffing and hours of operation of the garage with respect to the valet parking that's been testified to this evening?
Yeah. So this parking operation will be on a 24-hour, 7-day basis.
And can you address how the operation will work in terms of the valet attendant addressing ADA spaces and the car sharing space?
Sure. So car sharing is going to be handled via credential, right? So somebody who's going to have a right to use a car shared spot is going to come in either with their zip car card or some other credential. They'll present it to the valet. The valet will go and retrieve the shared parking vehicle and hand it over to that individual. Same thing will happen on the reverse. When they come back with the car, they'll give it to the valet. The valet has his own access card for that car. We'll park the car until the next user comes in to use it. In terms of the ADA spots...
Well, hold on a second, hold on. It doesn't make sense that if there's a zip car for potentially 6 units, that there's some kind of reservation
That's
plan?
handled by Zipcar. So
I'm sorry?
I've got Zipcar probably in 30 facilities. You reserve the car, you pick the location, Zip will tell you whether that car is available. If it's available, then you'll reserve it. They'll activate your card. When you come to the garage, the valet will know to hand the car over to you.
All right, so they've already pre-arranged to get that car. They're not just walking in cold.
Correct. You have to be credentialed.
Yeah, that's what I'm,
Correct.
okay. Credentialed is different than reserving. I understand. You're assuming we know that they're reserved the car. I just wanted to be clear about that. They weren't just walking in, taking the car.
Yeah, they're going to have to be
people.
credentialed, and the valet will not release the vehicle to somebody who hasn't made a reservation.
There's a plan. Okay.
Yep.
So along those lines, I'm
Go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to, so can other people other than residents use the zip car that's in this lot?
Yes.
So, okay. Oh, that's interesting. And are there other sites in Montclair where the zip car is used?
They're currently at the Valley and Bloom deck.
Is that the only one that you're aware of?
At one time, they were at the Crescent Street deck. I'm not sure if they're still now. I'm told no, but they are at the Valley and Bloom deck.
And are there competitors to Zipcar? How's Zipcar doing? You used to hear a whole lot about it, and now you don't anymore.
So
I think they
I
were
would say they're
bought-
the leader in the shared car service category. There's other companies that do it, like Enterprise. Hertz used to have a program called Hertz on Demand, which they no longer do. There's other services like Cars to Go and a bunch of other ones that aren't really national. But I would say in terms of the largest and most reliable, I would go with Zipcar.
And they're owned by a larger company, I gather. Yeah.
They were recently
They were
purchased by Avis
Yeah.
Rental Car.
Right.
In your report, you gave some statistics about the coming and going of the deck in general, but I did not see what the report was on how frequently the zip car is used. There was some guess that one zip car counts about like 6, one time it was 5. How really, in terms of the record, what is the rate at which the zip car is checked out and checked in?
So I'm not prepared to answer that right now, but I could tell you that the zip cars in the Valley and Bloom deck do get used on a pretty frequent basis. They wouldn't, zip car wouldn't keep the cars there if they weren't being used. I mean, they're like any other business. If the location could support, they'll ask to put more cars in. If the location, doesn't seem like there's a market for it, they'll, if they start off with 2 or 3, they'll say, okay, we need to go to 2 or 1.
So what I should say is, and I apologize for this, we're, ownership and I and our other consultants were just speaking, we're not actually sure that the appropriate approach was that anyone off the street could come in and use a zip car. I think there may have been some expectation that this was really for the residents of this particular building. I don't want to continue to have Mr. Sokich give you possibly inaccurate information. Obviously, Mr. Sokich isn't prepared at this moment to strictly answer that question, so we may need to come back on that.
I just want to be clear here.
Yeah.
We are giving a spot, we are assuming a car in a spot is taking up the need for 6 spots in that space for use by the residents. But in reality, do they lease the spot from you? How does explain how the zip car works from a business standpoint. You pay them or they pay you?
The typical arrangement is the same one that Montclair has at the decks. They typically pay you for the space, and we would want to see this be used for our residents.
Okay, so that's fine if the car was only limited to the people in the building, which it's supposed to provide because it's accommodating ostensibly 6 spots. If they're renting it out, if they're paying you revenue to then be able to rent it out to others off the street, therefore not accommodating potentially the residents, that's crazy.
We didn't say that. I just said we would want it to be for our residents. It's up to us to make the decision with them and the arrangement.
I think what you're going to hear when we come back is that is going to be the arrangement. I just don't want to keep saying things that possibly I'd be correcting.
Do we need to put that in as a stipulation?
Well, we haven't gotten to that point yet, but I think, as an alternative too, if the Zip card is going to be available to the public, then if somebody takes it, then Zip has to be willing to bring another car. So that's something, if somebody in the residence wants the car, that it's there for them, I understand it's a money-making proposition for them as well, but, we would want to have that fleshed out, for the reasons as Martin is saying, because it's supposed to be there for an effective alternative for the residents not to have to own a car because they would have ready access to a car on the premises.
Certainly. Mr. Sokich, so I guess pivoting on, I'm not sure if you spoke to the operation of the garage with respect to the ADA spaces.
Sure. Yeah. So the ADA spaces are up front. There's 3 spots right next to the accessway into the building. Those spots are going to be self-parked by the ADA driver. They're in front of our queuing area, so basically the valet will be responsible if there's any car in that staged queue to move vehicles in order for the person to get in and out of those spaces.
And Mr. Sokich, I think this might be a good time to raise this. During prior testimony, there was some question that was raised by the board, I believe the chairman, in terms of if you could speak to where cars would be potentially stacked in aisles as far as proposed valet operation, and if there was a way to increase that number for just consideration in terms of looking at a 360-degree view of what we're proposing versus what could be done. If you could speak to that.
Yeah, sure. We'll walk over here.
We need you to grab the handheld mic then.
Oh.
Please. And if the light's not on, just push the button until it turns on. Yep, you're good.
Okay, so on the site plan here, I think we could add pretty easily 7 more cars. I would put another 2 in this area, another 2 here, and 1 over here. So that would bring the total up to 80, and it would not materially affect the operation in one way or another, but it would give us additional capacity if we ever got to that point.
So you're saying a maximum of 80? I thought somewhere I heard 88. You said a maximum of 80 if we were to...
I'm saying in this model, this scenario, which is conservative, if we were to add 7 more spots, it could easily be done without really affecting anything.
Is there a larger number that is possible, or is that the max?
You could go to a larger number, but it's a different type of operation.
When you say different type, you mean 2-man operation as opposed to 1-man?
2-man operation, you're talking parking cars 3 deep maybe in this area. You could pick up additional space, but in my opinion, I don't think, unless the demand spikes up for some unknown reason, I don't think it's necessary.
And Mr. Sokich, on that point, aside from just the potential need for additional manpower, one person or an extra valet, is there any concern in terms of impact of overall quality of the operation? And when I say quality, I mean retrieval time for occupants of the building who would be coming and going if there was a different operation down there with more cars, as you've just spoken to.
So when people are coming into the facility, there really is no wait time, right? So they're going to be pulling in, they're dropping off their car, the keys are going to be in it. It's a pretty speedy process. Where you run into wait times is usually on the pickup, the retrieval. To alleviate that concern, we're going to use technology. People are going to be able to text for their car in advance. They're going to be able to call down for their car. In case they don't do either one of those things, they could simply come down and request their car in person. But because this is primarily a residential garage, we're going to know the behaviors and patterns of the parkers who park with us. So we'll know, apartment 2B, Mr. Smith takes his car out at 8 a.m. every morning to go to work. And in all likelihood, his car will be set up in a way so that when he comes down, he's in and out quickly. So between the technology, knowing people's habits, folks being able to let us know in advance when they're going to need their car, it's the retrieval times, whether it's 73 spots or 80 spots, should not have a material effect on the wait times, considering it's a small incremental increase. The other thing I want to mention is it's 46 units. In my experience, 15 to 20% of those cars will never be in the garage. Those people go on vacation, the car's in the shop, wherever it may be. That's pretty much the trend that I've seen throughout the metropolitan area. 15% conservatively, 20% a little bit more liberal.
So is that based on your eyeballing guesstimate, or have you actually crunched the numbers?
We're very data-driven. I've crunched the numbers, and that's pretty consistent in a residential parking environment. In a commercial environment, it's different. Hotels are different. Commuter lots are different. But in a residential environment, that's pretty consistent. So the requirement here, if it's 1.1 or 1, would put you at 46 spots for the residents, or 51. In reality, the real use is going to probably be around 37 or 38 cars. Out of those 38 cars, probably 40% will be going out Monday through Friday on a consistent basis. So take another 18 cars out of that mix. During the day, there'll be 20 cars in here. So I'm really not concerned what goes in here, because I know I'm going to have plenty of space. Just based on my experience with residential parking, almost half that inventory is going to be out during the work week. And on weekends, it's a little bit less consistent because people like to sleep in, and but they do different things. They go to the beach, they go to the park, they go shopping. You'll still have plenty of space. It's going to be the busiest from a capacity standpoint in the evening, probably after 9 p.m. when most residents are home. During the day, even if this retail, restaurant, whatever comes in there happens, we'll have more than enough space to accommodate that. We'll be able to short-term park them in these spaces, in these spaces, in these spaces. I really don't see any issues with traffic flow or service. I mean, it's a pretty compact parking envelope. The valet will be right over here. Basically is able to see the entire inventory. This inventory of 33 sub-park spots is about a third of the size of the lot that everybody just parked in tonight. So just envision a third of that size and just having all the parking in front of you at all the time.
So I have a question. Is there the ability to, on an ad hoc basis, add more people? And what I'm thinking about is you have New Year's Eve, and 4 families in the building are having New Year's Eve parties. The hotel is having a New Year's Eve party. There could be a lot of traffic around there. So what happens then?
Yeah. So the schedule is not stagnant. We're elastic. So if we know that there's an event coming up, we'll put another valet on duty for
So
the
people
evening.
should advise you if they're having parties that they want their visitors to park at. That would be part of your scheme
Yeah,
there?
so a part of what we do too is also try to predict what's going to take place. I know sometimes because we operate Valley and Bloom, there's events that take place at the school across the street. We know we're going to get extra cars when that happens, Election Day, when there's concerts at the Wellmont. So we take all that into consideration, and we try to staff accordingly. But then there's always the unexpected as well.
So, Mr. Sokich, fair to say, does this go to sort of the idea, and I think you testified about this briefly, was that you're tracking usage by residents and customers to the retail to try and ensure a smooth operation over time?
Yeah, so we're really data-driven, so we have information on, to the minute, how many cars are in the deck, how many ingress vehicles are coming in, how many egress vehicles are going out. We know ticket and volume, length of stay. I mean, if you could imagine a metric that you would want information for, we could provide it.
Can you provide, Mr. Troutman?
So, well, obviously for this building, it's not built yet, but Mr. Sokich, based on your testimony, is it your expert opinion that this garage could operate safely and effectively through parking management techniques that you just testified to in the configuration that has been proposed by the applicant pursuant to Mr. Penke and others' testimonies?
That is correct.
Okay.
Can I ask
Yeah, sure. There was a point that came up in terms of counts, but I think we may have answered it. Or at least I suspect it'll come up in questions from the board.
Yeah, I have a question. What is the turnover of your staff, your valet staff?
Valet
Yeah, they turn over pretty
They do.
frequently, I guess.
Yeah, well, look, you're talking about a position that usually pays a little bit above the minimum wage. A lot of the valets depend on tips to supplement that income. To answer your question in terms of turnover, it's probably 75% in facilities where tips are not so good. In facilities where the tips are higher, then it's probably lower, like 50%.
So the success of this is contingent upon a minimum wage worker who turns over 75% in a year.
No. So we have a pipeline of employees that are constantly being trained, because we're a growing company, when I started with Pro Park in New York, we had 0 locations. We've got 150 now. I'm able to promote people, give them raises, which enables me to keep good people working longer because of the career opportunities.
I understand they're driven.
That was count.
But I'm bummed.
But you're saying that one attendant, in the morning when there's many people coming down, that one attendant can, within what period of time, keep up with getting the car, raising a car, lowering a car, all of that? You're saying that there are no self-parking spaces
Nope.
left in this plant?
Okay, so to answer your question, the attendant that comes in on that morning shift will have the garage set up by the overnight person. So the overnight person, when it's really slow, they know which cars need to go out at 6 a.m., 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m., and their job is to set that parking deck up so that the 6 a.m. cars are in the most convenient spots, then 7, then 8, then 9. So when that morning individual comes in at, let's say, 7 a.m., they're already going to have their cars set up in the right spots to go out at the right time increments. That's for the vast majority of parkers that we know who are going to be living in the building. You're going to have folks that are coming in from that retail space. They'll also be able to be accommodated fairly easily, in my opinion, by the one individual. If we found out that that space, for whatever reason, the business took off and drove a lot of cars to the garage, I could do 2 things. I could either have the overnight overlap with the morning shift, so there's 2 people there until like 10 a.m., or I could bring in a part-time person, have them come in from 7 to 11 to help with the morning rush.
Other questions from the board? Questions from the public of this witness? Mr. Troutner?
Very briefly, we'll conclude with Mr. Kevin Webb's testimony from Langen Engineering, just to address a couple of the changes on the engineering plan and some.
All right, well, before we switch gears to engineering then, I know we have a representative from the Montclair Police Force here, and we really wanted to get some feedback, take advantage of that opportunity while she's here to get some feedback on parking on Orange Road, and how it's enforced and what's going on.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
State your full name for the record.
Lieutenant Stephanie Ignazzo.
Please proceed.
So we've had some questions come up during this proceeding with respect to what's permitted on Orange Road, what's not permitted on Orange Road in the vicinity of this, the hotel and this potential construction area, as well as the parking deck a little further down. So, maybe you can shed some light on it for us, as to what's allowed and what the enforcement policies are, et cetera.
Sure. So I have had an opportunity also to speak with Ms. Talley regarding the parking restrictions that are currently covered by ordinance. We've actually been able to map that out. I'm not sure if everybody does have a copy of that. Okay. So one of the areas of concern that did come up, and this was actually brought up recently by Transit, was the location of the bus stop. I think there has been some issue also, just that with the construction in the area, there's been signage missing, so that caused a little bit of confusion. possibly with what is allowed there parking-wise, what is and isn't allowed. So the biggest area of concern that we found, again, since that construction and the closing of Orange Road, when that came up, we were able actually to relocate the drop-off area for the school, which we've kept because it's worked out so well. That was for Hillside, but there is the pre-K also. And currently there is, in front of or adjacent to the Orange Road parking deck, there is 10-minute parking Monday through Friday in the morning and the afternoon, which was to accommodate pre-K parents being able to park briefly, go pick up or drop off their child. The New Jersey Transit bus stop is located right in front of the proposed construction site for northbound bus line. So after speaking with Ms. Talley, I think we were comfortable proposing at least to move that back south in front of the Orange Road parking deck. And we could still end up keeping some of that area as that 10-minute parking.
It's one of the questions I think that came up from one of the residents, in fact, was about overnight parking in the area and whether or not that was allowed, whether it could be allowed, whether maybe that area could be considered for sort of I guess, I don't know whether they classify it as permit parking, but, on some streets where there's limited parking, they do allow residents on the street to park their car on the street overnight. And we also had some testimony, I believe, from a traffic expert saying that the street was wide enough to allow parking on both sides of the street. So can you shed any light on that for us, from an enforcement standpoint and from, what your personal knowledge about what the situations are?
Absolutely. So on the residential side of Orange Road, closest to Bloomfield Avenue, right now it is designated as an on-street overnight parking permit area. And I believe that has been posted or reposted recently. I know we heard some comment from public comment recently about that. It is ordinanced as an on-street, one of not a lot of streets in Montclair, but we do have several streets that are designated for overnight parking, and it's a specific S permit. They have to have a street parking permit to be able to park there. The time is to...
Can I just ask you a question?
Yes.
Is that for specific people, so for specific houses, or could someone around the block obtain a permit and park there?
We don't issue the permits, so I don't want to give the wrong answer. I believe it's for residents of that street, but I don't want to give the improper or incorrect information. I think that's for the parking utility does issue the permits.
Yeah, but it should be just for the residents on the street.
It should be for the residents of that street, I believe.
How far down the street does that go? Does that go from Bloomfield Avenue down to Hillside, or how far down that street does it go?
No, it's not the length of Orange Road. It is, I don't have the exact...
Does it extend the length of the houses that are there?
It's the length of the houses, and then the southbound bus line has a bus stop designated in mid-block there.
So
in the middle of that block on the southbound?
Correct.
How many spaces are we talking? I guess that's a better question.
I believe it's about 10 spaces. 10 or 11 spaces.
I think if you look at the map that was in the memo, that it's the green area. Because we were able to use GIS to get the exact dimensions.
So
roughly.
So there are overnight spaces there, but during the day, is parking permitted?
Yes.
So there's in between the parking, groups of parking spaces, there's a bus stop?
Correct. There is a mid-block bus stop located there.
Yeah.
There's
that
no
must
houses, though. Right?
Is it it's by the field?
Yeah, by the field.
Yes, it's right at the beginning. If you're heading south on Orange Road, the bus stop begins just at that last house.
Okay.
And then it goes into portion of where the field is. It's my understanding that a mid-block established bus stop requires more more of a distance than a bus stop that's
Right,
established
to
at
pull
a
in and
corner
pull out,
because the
yeah.
bus needs the space to be able to pull up. And that was one of the complaints that we received from Transit recently, that they're not able to pull over for that bus stop because there's constantly been cars parked there.
Okay. So other than the bus stop, though, as long as adequate space was permitted for the bus stop, there could be parking all the way down to the school, theoretically, right? I mean,
Correct.
that the street's wide enough for it.
Yes.
So it's just, other than maybe the time restriction that's placed on it for the school, there shouldn't be a good reason to necessarily prohibit parking on Orange Road for traffic reasons.
Correct. The street is definitely wide enough to accommodate parking on both sides.
Okay.
I agree.
All right. That was primarily the question, something that we wanted to get straight. Evidently, the resident who was here at the last meeting may not have been aware the fact that it was designated, and it may have been due to the absence of signage, but her statement, she did indicate that people were parking there. So I feel good that has been cleared up, and perhaps there's some opportunity to permit some more on-street parking there, at least at times that don't present an issue for the school or the pre-K operation.
There's just one more question. With regard to discussion that we've been having as to whether there should be a drop-off area in front of the new building, as opposed to not having one, is there anything that you would comment from a traffic point of view that would favor one position or the other?
I don't think that having the drop-off area is a bad idea. I'm not sure, I think I have to agree with Mr. Dana Miller on this, that I don't think that the cutout is necessary. I think it's actually, even if you just designated it as a pull-up curbside, I don't know whether the cutout is really necessary. It does act as a traffic calming for the street, and may help keep traffic from having that wide open space, especially if we end up designating the space before that as a bus stop, moving that further south. It would really, you wouldn't have the parking on both sides for quite some length of the street.
So you're saying no to the cutout?
If there was,
favoring it.
yes, I'm more in favor of keeping the curb line without the cutout, but still, I'm not opposed to having a drop-off area. I think it's a good idea. I think a lot of people use Uber and Lyft now, and it's much better than having them try to double park and block traffic. So from a traffic safety standpoint, absolutely, I'm in favor of the drop-off zone.
So basically, you would say just have that space designated as just a drop-off space, but no parking, no long-term standing. It's a drop-off space, but it doesn't have to be indented.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. All right. Do we have any other questions? Thank you very much for sitting through this and being patiently listening and providing us with some insight.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you for the service that you give. You've always been one of the stars of getting us parked well.
Okay, Mr. Troutner.
State your name for the record, spell your last name,
Kevin Webb, W-E-B-B.
and you're still under oath.
Thank you. I will keep this very brief. There was one sort of question left unanswered by my testimony last time. Mr. Fire Official Thomas has come here to straighten me out on that. We have worked together, and I've worked together with your engineer as well. Had to do with the fire lane striping along Central Verde Drive, particularly on the north side, and whether or not how that would be combined with the loading area that's been defined there. Our plans have been revised to show a yellow stripe in front of the proposed curb line on the north side. On the south side, there's an existing area adjacent to the Orange Road deck that has a slightly wider area that's cross-hatched. My concern, and the reason why I didn't necessarily duplicate that on the north side, but will certainly work with the folks here, Exactly how to demonstrate that is the entire width of Centro Verde is only 14 feet wide. We've lost a couple of feet of sort of the perception of what that cartway is with the fire lane striping against the Orange Road deck. I thought to duplicate that might make it so narrow as to, be concerning perhaps for drivers. I'm certainly open to, the best judgment of both your engineer and your fire official on how best to do that, and we can take their comments, and it seems like we're making some other plan revisions, we can incorporate it there, or if we were to eventually be approved as a condition of approval.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, questions from the board?
You're still going to take a look at the crosswalk
We are,
stamping?
absolutely, and I think that we have a better opportunity to look at that holistically now that it appears that we are going to be adjusting the curb line as well.
Okay.
What's your question?
With regard to a crosswalk over the driveway, we had talked about either stamping it differently or
Oh, I'm sorry.
somehow
Yes, yeah.
designating it
Gotcha.
more of a pedestrian
Yes.
way than
Yes.
a driveway.
And we'll certainly incorporate that into the revision as well.
And then I also noticed it looked like there was an infiltration trench shown.
Once upon a time, there had been, at the request of your prior engineer,
Right.
the roof leader from, that's on the front facade of the building, the Orange Road facade, was requested to be put into an infiltration trench. That was taken out. There is an infiltration trench on Centro Verde for the roof leader, and again, that was put in as the request of your prior engineer. And I won't speak for your current engineer, but I believe the recommendation was that that could remain, but the one on Orange Road would be replaced with a solid wall pipe.
That's correct. The one on Centro Verde is nearest to a planting area that could actually provide use and purpose to feeding that planting area with an elevated water table at that location. Whereas in the Orange Road location, it's more likely just to be susceptible to differential settlement in the sidewalk areas or any other kind of slipping of the subgrade around utilities or any other conduits through the area. So in that area, there's not a direct benefit to feeding the plant life other than the street trees that have their own tree wells.
I don't disagree with that. My recollection is that when we had a member of the public ask about water infiltration, I think she was seeing water in her homes. Some of the residents were seeing water in their homes. I thought the testimony was this was 100% discharged to the storm sewer, and that's why I was confused.
Okay, I admittedly don't recall exactly that. Certainly all of the, within the context of the area that would flow towards the residential, I mean, we're already really downgraded from that residential area.
I understand.
Certainly anything on the south side of the building would not, it would surprise me a great deal if it were to in any way be demonstrated to impact those houses on the west side of Orange Road. But, so there is a limited amount. I mean, it's essentially a solid walled pipe that has some perforation and provides some infiltration. The vast majority, certainly for heavy rainstorms, will still continue to flow towards the
Just
storm
bypass
sewer.
and go to the storm
Absolutely.
sewer? Okay.
It's not designed as an infiltration bed to hold and discharge to groundwater. So they're not taking any credit in their stormwater management approach for the loss of that water, as opposed to sending it to the sewers. So they're calculating for full conveyance.
Yeah, correct. That's a better way to clarify. It's not detention. It's just really giving the opportunity for some infiltration to, again, utilize for the tree wells.
Okay, I think that makes sense.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Questions from the public of this witness? All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
That's it for this evening, Mr. Chairman. I believe when we return, we would propose to complete some architectural testimony, as well as present the testimony of our professional planner, and I believe there were one or two issues, obviously, that were raised this evening, which we'll have to speak to when we come back.
Okay, so in anticipation of your architectural testimony, looking at the rendering that you passed out this evening, on the, I don't know, this is a pediment or whatever, this course that runs across the first floor, you have 3 grayed out areas out of the 5 column areas. Is that intentional? Or is that, were you trying to designate the entrance somehow there? It just struck me as strange when I looked at it, because otherwise everything else is symmetrical. It doesn't, but, you know, I was wondering why the other 2 columns weren't the same as the 3 on the front.
We'll have to ask the architect to get back to you. I'm not sure. What's the 3 that are over the entrance? Right?
I know one of them is over the whatever that room is, the utility room or whatever.
Transformer.
But, I mean, it's not supposed to, I didn't think you'd want to exactly highlight that. Highlight that there's something different. You'd want it to more blend in. It just looked.
We'll ask.
And and it's, if you're trying to accentuate the entrance as opposed to the other side of it, I don't know, it just looked funny to me, because there's so much, everything else is so symmetrical, it just looked funny.
We'll get that answer, thank you.
All right, so when's our next?
It'll be March 9th.
This is the, where's the billboard? This is the
All right.
billboard right here. This is the.
Okay, so we will see you then, and everything is, if we need extensions or whatever, you're granting that,
these are
right?
missing, they're missing.
We consent.
I got no
You
doubt.
consent to the waiver of time which the board has done.
Yep, that's correct.
Thank you.
All right, great, thank you.
Oh.
They were great.
Yeah. people love
That's all right,
it. I know.
it's fine. I heard it. I heard it.
Very, very worthwhile.
Okay. Of course,
Well, there are bills to pay.
always
Was there, did your packet include a short
Yes.
memo from me about the
Yes,
official
well,
paper?
Well, maybe we could get to one last issue.
Okay, there's 2 items. Last month, we voted to designate the Montclair Local as our official paper. Unfortunately, it's come to my attention that they cannot print legal notices. They don't have the correct type of mechanism to mail the paper out. Has to be second-class mail. They don't mail it second-class mail, so technically they cannot be they can't serve legal notice, and they cannot be designated the official paper. So at this point, I think we best go back to using the Montclair Times, which does meet that requirement. Okay?
So be it.
Agreed.
All right.
That was it. I feel bad that there's so little, but the paper is like 2 sheets of paper.
That was, who made the motion? Was that Martin?
They're really-
Mr.
Okay.
Schwartz and Chair Nguyen.
And John, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay.
Motion to pay bills.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Great.
We good?
We are done.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Bing, bing, bing.